Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Wednesday webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about Power BI and specifically how we can use Power BI with GP. And we're going to get right into it. We'll spend most of the time in a demo, but just a few talking points here. Power BI is a really great analytics tool for business intelligence, but it can be overwhelming when you start trying to work with the GP data. So to talk about that, the first thing is there's two ways to connect to your GP data. There is an OData connection that can be set up, or you can connect directly to your data through your SQL server. My recommendation is to use your SQL server. It is easier for refreshing your reports. Just working with the data is a little bit easier to work with when you do go through a SQL server. With the OData connection, if you are super concerned about security or you want to get into who has access to the report at like row level security, like you want to give 20 people access and you want 5 to see this much, 10 to see this much, an OData connection may work better for that, just because that does connect right into the system versus going to the SQL server. But for the ease of creating reports and everything that I've seen in working with clients, the SQL server is the better way to go when connecting to your GP data. Another thing when you're working with your GP data in Power BI is you want to spend some time cleaning it up, and we'll review that here in the demo. But when you're connecting into raw tables, a lot of data comes over, and this is where people will stop using Power BI, is they wind up with 130 different columns to choose from. They can't find what they're looking for, and it's not user-friendly. So you always want to make sure you spend some time cleaning up your data. Some of the things we're going to look at today is we're going to look at choosing the columns so we can cut that down, transforming some of the data or cleaning it up, and adding some formulas or new columns are also something that you can do. And then we're just going to create some basic visualizations. We're not going to spend as much time on creating visualizations. If that's something that you're interested in, we do have the Intro to Power BI webinar that we've done in the past that talks about the basic visualizations, but really the majority of our time is going to be spent looking at how the GP data comes over and what you can do with it once you have it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at Power BI. So for this session, we are using the Power BI desktop that is available to download for free. It's powerbi.com, usually brings up the Microsoft website, and you can always download the Power BI desktop for free. So this is the Power BI desktop here. And you can see I already have one GP table that I have brought over, and I've already cleaned it up. You can see there's only a few columns. So let's go ahead and take a look at how you would set up, and we're going to connect to a SQL server for this demo, just because it is my preferred way and what I would recommend to most of you. So under Get Data, we chose SQL Server, and it really is just entering the server name. So the one I'm using for this, we're going to enter that. And we're going to import it directly. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then here we can see all the different folders that we have. And this is where the demo GP data lives for us. So let's take a look. I'm just going to pull in the customers tab here. So when I select customers, you can see off to the right-hand side is a preview of the table that we're looking at. This is a way for you to be able to say, yep, this is the one I want, or nope, I want a different one. It's just a way to preview it before you start loading it. You have two options once you've selected the table that you want. You can either load it directly, and then it will come in over here as we see this SOP table I've already loaded, or you can go directly to edit. With SQL data or GP data, I always recommend to edit it first for a couple of reasons. With our demo data, there's not a lot of data in the system. So it's easy to load and it's going to load quickly. If you have year over year of GP data, that's going to take a long time. There's going to be a lot of rows because it's just going to pull everything in. So I always recommend editing first because you can filter down. Maybe you only want to look at the last 2 years of data, or maybe you want, filter it by some other way for the report you're looking to build. Another option that's available, and is one that I do recommend to a lot of clients, is to have a view created in your SQL Server that pulls the exact columns or cells or information that you want. You can see with this one, we pulled in the customer table and there's 182 columns. So we're going to have to go through and clean this up and transform the data, exactly like we want it. And if I was connecting to multiple tables, maybe I wanted to pull customers and, I already have a SOP table in there, or I wanted to pull accounts. Once you start connecting to multiple raw tables, you're going to have to do that for every table that you're pulling over, even if it's only a couple pieces of information that you want. So it can save you some time if you have a view created that's housed in your SQL Server and you can connect directly into that view here. It just eliminates some of the cleanup time. So we've got our table here. Let me extend this. The first thing I want to do is cut down the number of columns that we need to see, because most of this data we don't really need. So up here in the toolbar, I'm going to go ahead and go to Choose Columns. And what this does is it just shows me all the columns it's pulling. It's going to pull everything from the entire table. So I get rid of the select all, and then I'm just going to go through and choose what is it that I want to see. And I'm really just going to pick a few here. Okay. So we'll say those are the columns that I want to use for the report. So we're down to 18 columns. So we've already cut down the amount of data that's going to have to import every time we refresh the report. So that's going to help first from performance of the report. And then again, we only have 135 rows here. But if you wanted to filter it down even further, there's a couple different ways that you can filter within the tables. From a text perspective, they have just a regular filter where you could select, these are the 3 that we're interested in. There also are text filters here that you can get to, equals, begins with, contains, anything like that. And you can do that on any column if you right click on it. Or I'm sorry, filtering is on the down arrow, right clicking we're coming to, I apologize. So you can filter text, and you can also filter by date. So there's not a lot of dates on this one, but if we look at, for example, our SOP table, maybe you only wanted to look at the last year of data. If you go to your DateTime filters, you could select, it's within this year, and that also will cut down. We don't have anything within this year, but that's what's going to cut down your data load, and that'll help with your performance. Anytime that you do something within this editing of your queries, you can cancel it out. You see here on the right-hand side, it's telling us what we've done. We removed other columns. Now we just filtered. Well, that didn't give us any results, so we're just going to click the red X to remove the filter. Let's go back to the Customers tab. Another way to make your data easier to work with is you can rename it. Now, within this, a lot of this is very, you know what it is. It's a customer number, customer name, but sometimes the columns don't make as much sense. Here in the customer one, most of it is pretty good. When you get into the stop table here, you can see it just has doc date or GL post date, location code, it has the LOCN. You can always rename your columns so that your end users can work with the data easier. And this is where we're doing the right click. So if you right click, it gives you the options here. You can rename. And the goal with this is always just to make it easier for creating the reports at the end. What are people going to either search for, or what are they going to recognize when looking at the columns? So you can rename a few of them. Another thing that you can do to make your data easier to work with is you can transform. So I'm going to do this in the customer table here. And specifically, we're going to look at our salesperson ID. So ours are pretty good in here. You can see that they match. If I were to run a chart on the salesperson ID, we probably would have, just one Paul show up, just one Greg. But anytime you have a text type cell, it can be open to interpretation or human error. So if there is a period or isn't a period, you'd wind up with multiple ones, multiple results, even though it's the same person. So Power BI does have a way to transform your data. If you right click and we go to the transform, here are the different ways you can transform a text column. You can change it all to lowercase, change it all to uppercase. You can capitalize each word. So, if we just did that, then you can see now it's not the full name that's capitalized. You can also trim the text. So sometimes if there's a space at the end, Power BI can read that, and then that would create a duplicate. You could clean the data up. You could select the length. So maybe you only wanted the first 3 or 4 letters or characters within a cell. There's a few different ways to transform your text cells. With date cells, so we're going to look at this last age because this one is a date one. You can transform this. GP data always comes over with both the date and the time. You can change that to date only if you only want to see the date. You can also, you could pull out just, you want to see what quarter does this fall in, or month, what week or day. You can really dial it in. I don't see people transforming their cells so much with the dates as far as pulling it down to just the quarter. A lot of people like to retain the actual date. We will look at a way here in a little bit where you can add a column that pulls that quarter or month out from the date, but it adds it as a new column instead of taking away your actual date. Another thing that you can do is you can create new columns. So I mentioned we're going to look at pulling out date ones, but there are a few different types of columns that you can add. So when you're with here, we can go to add column. And the first type of column we're going to look at adding is a conditional column. And we're just going to pull, we want to see if they're a high balance customer. And this works similar to conditional columns in Excel. It's going to feel very familiar for you. We're just going to go if the customer balance is greater than or equal to, let's say 5,000. We're going to say, yes, they're a high balance customer, else no. And I'll show you what we're going to do with this column in a moment. But here we can see now that column is added at the end. So you can think of things that you may want to be able to filter your reports by, or things that you do want to extract from the data that you're pulling from GP. So I mentioned that we could look at extracting out date information. So when we're on this date column here, so this last aged, as long as you're under add columns, there's a date option, and there's also a time option when you have a date and time, but we're specifically looking at date here. You can start pulling out different pieces of data. So if you wanted to pull out just the year, you select year, it's going to add a column here at the end that pulled out the year. You can also pull out month, and you can even do start of month or end of month, days in the month if you were looking to be able to slice your data that way. From the quarter perspective, you can pull out, the start and end of the quarter. One thing that I have seen before with customers is pulling out the week of the year they're in. And I see this a lot with sales. So what we do is we pull out the week of the year so we can see these sales took place in the 16th week of the year. What you can do in a year over year comparison is you can compare week 16 this year to through week 16 of last year. So I do see people pull either week or day of the year out when they're looking at year over year comparisons. Another thing that you can do within Power BI is you can do formulas, and there's two ways to do the formulas. There is within here, if you do a custom column, what Power BI uses, DAX is the name of basically the code that you're writing here for the formulas. So you can write a custom formula directly within here. So if you wanted to take, and add together, will give me aging bucket 1, plus you can add second one. You can do some basic formulas within this area. We're not going to do that for this. I'll show you the other area where you can build formula columns that's a little bit easier and has more options if you're so motivated to do really long formulas. So now we've gone through, we've taken out the extra columns, we've done some transformation of data. Once you have the table looking, this is what I want my end users to use. They're going to be able to understand the rows they're looking at. It has just the pertinent data. We've pulled out some extra data. Once you've got that all done, on the Home tab, we go to Close and Apply. And it's going to take a moment to apply the changes. And this is where the performance of the report can matter. If you're pulling 10 years of data, millions of rows, all of those columns, it can take a long time, and it can even time out when updating your reports. So that's why it is so important to edit this down. And then here we can see the table loaded. And we have just the columns that we selected. When you look at things down here on the SOP table, you can see the ones that we renamed. So an end user might be able to better pick what they're looking for if they were creating a report. And we can also see some of the things that we pulled out, our new columns, the week of year here and the year as well. We can see the high balance customer column that we also added. So once we have all this, you can see the report face here, or you can see the actual tables behind it if you click on the little table link. And here it looks very similar to the editing, the overall queries that we were just doing, but this is where you can view that data behind your report. And this is the other place that you can add in columns. So for example, let's say we were just going to calculate like a sales commission. If we do a new column and we wanted to know based on the total sales what the commission would be, And this is where it's pretty similar to how Excel works. You can do sums, you can do if type formulas, but we're going to keep it pretty simple just for the sake of time and this demo here. If we start typing in total, so the name of the column I'm looking for here is this total sales year to date. You can see it starts to pull up. So we're going to we want this column, and we're going to multiply it by, let's just say 10%. Now we can see that our commission is being calculated over here, so we can keep track of sales commission. So this is the better location for adding a lot of formulas if you're doing several ones, or you want to do more complex when you get into like if and statements, things like that. It's just a little easier to build them in here. So let's take a look at some basic visualizations so you can see what you would do with this data. So now you've cleaned it all up. You've got the performance running well because you have your data, really narrowed into what you need. Let's just put together a few things. We're going to go ahead and add an image. I just always like to add our logo to every report, or a company's logo, whoever's report it is. And we'll add a text box. And we'll just put a title to the report. Okay. So now let's start pulling over our data. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to see our overall customer balance. And when you pull over anything that is a number, it's always going to automatically default to this type of chart. But let's say we just want something that's going to kind of smack us in the face and say, here's what your overall customer balance is. We're going to go ahead and change it to a card. We can see right now that is our customer balance. Then let's go ahead and pull over, maybe we want to look at it by state. And when you have a location that's being selected, Power BI does automatically realize it's a location and put it on a map. So here we can just see, here's our customer by state overall there. And if we go ahead and we want to put it in the customer balance too, it's just taking a moment here. What you can do then when you select a location here, so we selected Washington, you see over here that our customer balance updated. Here's the customer balance for Washington. If we select here, you can see this is our customer balance. So it just gives us a way to be able to look and update the rest of our charts if you want to look by location. Now, another thing you can do, this gives us a total of everything. So that's the customer balance for every customer that we have. You can also add in slicers. So we had done the salesperson, maybe you want to be able to pull it in. When you pull over a text column, Power BI does automatically default to a table, but we're looking for the one here with the filter that changes it to a slicer. And then you can go ahead and select by salesperson. And again, it updates everything else within Power BI. So for example, we added that conditional column, the high balance customer, and where that would be beneficial is if we want to make, say, a slicer here, we can now filter our high balance customers are contributing, to 2.76 million of our balance. And here you can see the total for our low balance customers. So a lot of times conditional columns is a way to create these filters that may not otherwise exist. And then let's go ahead and make just a line chart here. I've been pulling things over onto the dashboard and then changing it, but you also can select what you want first. So for example, if you want a line chart, you can select it here, and then you can just pull over what is it that you want to see. So we want to see our customer balance by customer class. We've created a chart here. And these are just some basic visualizations, things that I've done in the past for different customers, or things that you may want to see. The big thing when you're working with GP data is just to make sure that you do clean that data up. That way it will not be overwhelming to those trying to build reports. The key takeaways that I would give to you from this is I always recommend going through a SQL server to connect to your data if possible. I mean, there's nothing wrong with OData. It just takes a little bit more work to get it set up and can give you a little more technical issues trying to connect to it when you're refreshing data, especially if you do automatic refreshes. So I always recommend a SQL server. If you're looking to combine data from different reports, like for example, we've got the customers in a SOP table. If you're looking to connect to maybe 3 or more raw tables, I recommend having a view created so that you can just pull the one table. You can also already filter it in that view if you want, versus having to create the filters directly within Power BI. It works the same either way, just it can save you a little bit of time sometimes. If you have someone that can create a view, that's definitely helpful. And then just to make sure that you edit your data first so you're not loading that large amount of data. Go into, when you're connecting to your data, select to edit it, do the filtering that you want. If you're connecting to raw tables, choose the columns you want so you're not bringing in any excess data. That way it just really helps with the overall performance of the report. So I know this was a very quick overview on working with your GP data and getting that to Power BI. There is a bunch of functionality within there that we definitely can explore further, but this is about all we can cover in a half-an-hour time frame. It does give you enough to try and kind of get in there and play with it. Does anyone have any questions? Well, perfect. I thank you for spending a little bit of your afternoon with me. And if you do have any questions that come up afterwards, definitely you can reach out to me, and I would love to talk Power BI with you all day. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.